Live streaming is on.
I heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are live.
Live stream.
All right. We are live. Welcome, everybody, to Apologeeks, the Preston Stirred Saturday morning show where we geek out on apologetics and don't have a script. That might be apparent today. But we always like to start out. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional argumentation, or better yet, logical fallacies that are based in emotion. And so that's what we're going to cover today on Preston Stirred. I'm Jason. That's David. We always like to start our show out with a prayer. So, David, do you mind starting us out? I don't know what our rotation is, so you start, I'll finish today.
All right, sounds good. Dear Heavenly Father, hallowed be thy name. Thank you for your many, many blessings. Thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for bringing the people that are watching today. Please be with them in their lives and help them to understand what you would have us to tell them today. Please be with me and Jason today as we talk to everybody. Give us the words that you'd have us to say, and if we say the wrong thing, don't let it mess anything up and be ineffective. We want your word and your knowledge and your wisdom to benefit our brothers and sisters and anyone else watching. We ask all these things in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. Well, today, David, we're supposed to be talking about logical fallacies that have to do with emotion. But this is part of a series of videos that's talking about logical fallacies. And we might want to go over what that is and why we're discussing that. So here on Apologeeks, we discuss how to participate in relational apologetics or relational evangelism. And in that, when we're in discussions with people, we want to make sure that we're thinking properly, that when we're weighing argumentation or ideas or belief systems, that we do that with a clear mind and rationally. And there are certain fallacies that lead us into wrong thinking. And so last week we talked about the straw man fallacy, where you build up an argument that doesn't actually represent your opponents or your interlocutors or your conversation partner's viewpoint. You build up a fake argument that's easier to knock down, and you argue against that rather than their actual argument or belief system. And that's a logical fallacy. You're refuting the wrong belief. So today we're going to be talking about emotional fallacies and how we create calls to emotions, appeals to emotions in different ways. Basically, the idea behind emotional fallacy is that we make an argument that's emotional rather than logical, and we expect people to agree with that argument because of the emotional value of it rather than the logic. And this is poor logical thinking. Now, do emotions sway our thinking? I think they do. I think that oftentimes emotions sway my day-to-day decisions, and I don't know that that's always a bad thing. However, when we're looking at argumentation, or we're looking at belief systems, or we're looking for truth, which is really what this is all about, looking for truth. When we're looking for truth, emotion often has very little to do with what's true and what's not. And so that's where these emotional arguments often come into play. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I think you made a good point that emotion isn't off the table completely, but it needs to be used at the appropriate time and not for the wrong reason. So a good example is trying to what this whole show today is about, which is preventing you from, or making you aware so that you won't use an emotional argument masquerading as a logical argument. And so there are times when you do need to speak to their heart. There's some people that is almost all that you can talk to them with. And that's what they respond to. and that's what makes sense to them. But normally, in the circles that apologetics work in, that's generally not the case. That is more often the case whenever you're speaking to people on an individual basis and and dealing with them personally, rather than working with someone where you two together are working on a particular argument or topic, and you're trying to get to the logical bottom or truth of the matter. So that deals with, so emotional arguments are not good when dealing with ideas. Emotional arguments can be good when you're dealing with the person, and they are, that's what they're looking for. They are looking not for an emotional where you cause traumatic emotion to them, but where where an emotional argument appeals to them and their sensibilities, where they understand, they're like, all right, yes, I could make this decision based on my feeling on this. But whenever we're trying to ascertain the truth of a specific topic rather than a person, there's rarely a place for that.
Yeah, and I think perhaps one of the places that we see the appeal to emotion the most often is in purchasing and advertising, actually. It's one of the easiest ways to understand it. Now, we will be discussing the appeal to emotion within an argumentation or debate type scenario, but if we're looking to understand the appeal to emotion, it's easy to see that in advertising. So, for example, you're looking at homes, and your real estate agent is bringing you around to different homes, and there's a home. Let's say you're a young man and you have a young wife and you are pregnant, and the real estate agent brings you to a home that is staged and includes a nursery. And all of a sudden, that becomes y'all's number one home on the list, not because it's closer to work or a better neighborhood or things like that, but rather it was already staged for the cycle of life that you're moving into, and that brings up emotions for new parents, right? And so they see the nursery built into the home, and they're like, wow, this must be for us. And it's all emotion, and it has nothing to do with the facts. We see that in car purchases and all kinds of advertising, to where they set up a scenario that plays on your emotions, and that sways the buying decision. And so your buying decision should not always be tied to those emotions, and especially if somebody's playing off of those emotions and doing it on purpose.
Yeah, I think that's the main differentiating factor here, where it's used in a manipulative way.
Right. And so often I think in argumentation, by the way, this is the fallacy, the one that we're talking about right now, is actually called the appeal to emotions. So you can kind of get what the argument or the fallacy is by its name. Its name is appealing to someone's emotions rather than their logic. And so when we're dealing with the appeal to emotions, by the way, real quick, I wanted to say last week we kept kind of fumbling around a vernacular. Remember that we like to set vernacular when we're talking to somebody, and we'll set vernacular for this channel. But last week we were kind of fumbling around with an idea, and after we got off of the Apologeeks show, David and I had a call and kind of nailed down a vernacular for the show, which is isolate and clarify. It's going to be one of our favorite things, and you're going to hear it a lot. When we are dealing with an argument or a line of thinking within seeking truth and apologetics, often we want to deal with one argument or one fact at a time. We want to isolate it. We want to isolate the specific fact that we're looking at. And often, we've discussed this before, one of the problems with either debates or discussions is that you throw a whole bunch of stuff on the table and you're like, oh, you believe in God? What about this and that and this and that and this and that? And you're dealing with all this different stuff. One of our great suggestions is to isolate and then clarify that point. Make sure that you're both on the same page, speaking about the same truth. So when you're dealing with an emotional fallacy, when you isolate the argument and begin to clarify it, you should always ask, is this appealing to my emotions rather than my reason?
Yeah, and to the topic of us fumbling around on the last show, I'd like to make this statement right now, and it applies to all shows, past and future and present. Jason and I will always be examples, but we may not always be good examples. So read your Bible, and you'll always know which kind of example that we're doing at the moment. And either way, we should be able to edify and hopefully use the bad examples as a teaching tool. And if we miss any of them, like we're kind of fessing up right now, but if we ever fail to fess up to any of them, you be sure and let us know. Absolutely
Call us on it. We believe in accountability, and we will. We're human. We will flaw. We will flop around and fail. We're trying to do this thing to help people, and we ask that you hear us pray and ask that God's words be part of what we say. And if they're not, hopefully He'll take them away. But we are flawed humans. That being said, we're going to fumble around and come up with new things. And I like isolate and clarify. Like
Oh yeah.
After we decided that was the kind of the phrase we're going to use, it's so important to isolate and clarify. And so as far as doing appeals to emotion, when we're isolating, so let's take an example that we might actually see in apologetics. So let's say we're discussing, and I know that for those of you who watch Preston Stirred, we often talk about atheism. And that's because it's the low-hanging fruit and the easy thing to talk about when we're talking about ideals and policies and fallacies and things like that we're discussing now, setting up the way that we talk.
It's also the highest contrast. So it's easier to make examples with. And like we joke around before, poor atheists, that it's just too easy. But
right.
in reality, what we're doing here is the contrast is what allows us to make our examples, and that's our highest contrast demographic right there.
Right. So let's say, and I have had this experience, you're talking to an atheist and they're asking, you really believe in God, like the creator God? You believe in a guy who sent Israel to murder women and babies and slaughter women and babies? Like, don't you love people and like humans? Like, why would you believe in a God who murders and slaughters babies? That's insane. Let's isolate. The argument is God doesn't exist because women and babies got murdered in Cana. First, let's isolate that and say, if women and babies died in the wars that God sent Israel on, could there be something outside? Could there be facts and reasons outside of my emotion that make that okay, or that make that there would be a reasoning that God said to do that? The second is, and this is not really appeal to argumentation or appeal to emotion. I just want to deal with it because of the argument. If you read later on in the Old Testament, it says that it later on says, and the Canaanites were so and so in the land. And so the idea is when God sent Israel to take Cana and told them to kill everybody, and that they slaughtered everybody, that is pejorative language. And the people obviously weren't completely wiped out because it talks about them later. Like, the people were still around, so they didn't kill everybody. This is pejorative language that we see all the time in military history and things like that. So that argument's not valid, but the argument wasn't valid to begin with because we were appealing to emotions. Go, David.
That's true. There. Actually, this brings up a good point in regards to our isolate and clarify, because isolate and clarify can be used maliciously, and wherein you isolate or you separate information from other information that's required. And oftentimes, now that I think about it, that's what happens with appeal to emotion. You often leave out information that would affect how the emotional response. And so this is a typical example where information is left out to make it sound like when God ordered the death of those people by Israel, it was just, some random folks that were, never harmed a fly and were over there just, enjoying their children, and the Israelites come and slaughter them because God told them to. Before, it talks about where God says, do not touch these people. Their wickedness is not fulfilled. I may be misquoting a little bit on the words used, but that's the meaning of it. And so what he's saying is, listen, I'm giving these people more and more chances. And what was happening there was you're worried about children. They were slaughtering their children. That's what, and then the Israelites started copying them later, and that's why they got wiped out and sent to the, every corner of the earth, was because they were sacrificing, that they were passing their children through the fire, as it says. And so these people, God had been letting these people murder their own children. Do
you want to tell everybody who might not know what passing their children through the fires actually means?
Okay. It's pretty much what it says. They would offer their children alive to Moloch in Moloch's in fire. So they would burn their children alive to worship Moloch, which is represented by a number of different ways, owls and some other things. But anyway, the point is that these babies and other people were burned alive.
Yeah, and I wanted to be very clear on that, just so people who are perhaps hearing this argument, maybe even this story for the first time, they were not just killing their babies like America kills its babies in the womb. They would actually build these statues, these metal statues of Molech, and Molech's hands on the statues were out like this, and think this is a metal statue, and then they would light a fire inside the statue so that the metal would heat up red hot. The entire statue would be red hot, and they would place their babies on the red hot hands of Moloch while their babies were alive, and watch them burn from the red hot hands of the statue. That is the kind of child murder that was going on. So this was not an innocent people. These were not innocent acts. And it wasn't even, I mean, not that America's way of killing babies is any better, but I just wanted to be clear.
Well, it's correct. But also, nobody's innocent. But in the sense of, we're not appealing to emotion here, by the way. We're just stating facts that if you want to if you say that it's unjustified what God ordered them to do, now let's put yourself in God's shoes and say, if you saw a group of people doing that to their children in your neighborhood, what would be your response? Would you, there's several different responses, but all of them include those people getting attacked. And either, if depending on your way of thinking, you're calling the police, which means you're pointing lethal force at them, or you're pointing your own lethal force at them. Either way, lethal force is being brought upon those people. Mm-hmm. And and God was God was wanting to make sure that it never happened again. And that was that goes back to the disobedience of the Israelites. And of course, they're a model to show what our own disobedience is like. And the reason that God didn't want any part of those people left was to stop that sort of and other behaviors. And what happened would be, oh, well, God really wasn't talking about this gold statue. This gold statue is worth a lot of money. It could help me. I could do God's work with this statue's money. You know, all these excuses that we ourselves make today, maybe not for those, excusing the same type of behavior always, but in America, as Jason mentioned, we've excused that type of behavior quite a bit for very similar reasons. So anyway, long story short is those appeals to emotion leave information out. And when you leave information out, people manipulate the way that you feel about things. And they will make things sound worse than they really are. And in particular, in this case, they are, they end up having people condemn their creator for doing less than probably they would have chosen to do, placed in that same situation.
Absolutely. So that's appeal to emotion, and I think we even got to see what isolation and clarification helps out with. When you isolate an argument and you go, hold on, let's look at this one argument, and then you clarify it, you begin to realize where the fallacies are, what illogical thinking or even what valuable thinking is in that specific point that you're discussing. So that's appeal to emotion. Now, there are specific types of appeal to emotion or subsets of that fallacy. The first one would be appeal to fear. The idea being that whatever argument is presented would create fear, which would be your motivating factor to agree with that argument. Can we think of any that? Can you think of an example, David, that would be an appeal to fear?
If you don't stay in your homes for the next 30 days, you're going to kill everybody's grandma.
I actually didn't know that's where you were going, but it was where I was going to go if you didn't have anything. So there you go. Now, that being said, we here at Apologeeks believe that we should do our parts to keep our loved ones safe. We should be smart. We should follow sanitary guidelines and even
just like I do for all other sicknesses.
Amen. And we should even social distance from people who are at risk. I 100% agree. But the reason we should do that should not be because we're afraid. That's the difference. The appeal to fear makes the reasoning valid because of your fear. And it's not valid because of your fear. It's valid because it's valid. The parts of it that are valid because they're valid. The parts of it that are invalid because they are appealing to your fear. Does that make sense?
Yep. Fear, I just make it a point here because fear and emotion, fear is the most motivating emotion. So it is most often the one used. Of course, the other one, in the sense of the example we just talked about, is condemnation, and that is one of the easiest to invoke against other people, and so that's also used a lot. So with the fear, and also with the condemnation, the example that we used, both of them involve leaving out important information, and the unknown is one of the easiest ways to invoke fear, namely because if you can leave it to if you can say it's unknown, then that allows the individual to come up with their worst case scenario instead of you having to think one up yourself, which may not apply to everyone. So whenever they say, we don't really know much about this virus, which is not true. And anyway, the point is to stoke this idea that we don't understand what's going on, or someone else is, what are they doing in there? We don't. They could be doing all sorts of stuff. So I guess there's a few examples with that. Try not to get too radical here. But
that's okay. I can take it in a different direction without getting radical. The fear or the appeal to fear is probably one of the biggest illogical motivating factors for an entire generation. FOMO, fear of missing out. Like we waste so much time on FOMO. We make decisions that are illogical because we fear that we're missing something. And this is shown in the fact that we pick up Facebook all night. You know how many people I watch go, I hate Facebook. I hate it. Every time I get on here, I see stuff I don't like. I hate Facebook. But they're on it at that time. It's because they're worried that they're going to miss out, that somebody's meme that's just going to blow their mind and change their life is going to be posted in the 10 minutes that they're not looking at their Facebook.
Let me tell you this. I learned this in trading circles. God has never and never will miss out on a limited time opportunity.
Oh my goodness.
And if God's in control of your life and you're seeking his will, you won't either.
Dude, and yes, you said limited time opportunity. So there are so many people. One of the biggest factors in people manipulating you for selfish gain is the fear of missing out. And limited time offer is primarily one of the ways. And I was trying to say this without getting in trouble, but I think I'm going to end up getting in trouble for this show. I love my wife. But I feel like sometimes she gets caught up in this fear. And you know what? It was way worse when she was younger. I very rarely hear it now, but I hear my daughter say it sometimes too. They'll go to a store and they'll find a shirt or something that they like, and they'll be like, I really like it, but I'm just not sure. And I'm like, sleep on it. And they're like, no. This shirt will be gone. Like they'd sell out of these shirts. And they make a decision to purchase based on that fear of the shirt being gone. Do you know how many shirts are made in the world every year? Especially, I've seen people do that. Now, not my wife, but I've seen people do this with cars. And you're like, you realize there are no one-off car. I mean, there are a few one-off cars, but that's probably not what you're looking at. That Ford F-150, there are millions available. And that car dealership that's telling you that you're going to miss out because it's a limited time offer is one of thousands of car dealerships within driving distance of your home. Like, but people make decisions based on this fear of missing out or this limited time offer idea. I didn't know if you wanted to add something. I know where I'm going next with that, but I didn't know if you wanted to add something at this point.
Steam ahead.
There is another fear-based argument that I think most of our opposition would say that we tend to use. It would be fear of the Lord. And the word says that the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. But it's not talking about fear as in terror or fear as in missing out. It is talking about understanding the nature and power and majesty of God. And the reason this isn't a logical fallacy is because it's based in truth. Now, if there is a truth that in and of its own nature brings fear into you, then it's not a fallacy. It's actually truth. And so when we begin to look at the majesty of a being who created everything, who created you and holds your breath in his very hands, who gives you your next heartbeat and created everything you know and created it good, And then you begin to be presented with the knowledge that you have destroyed that good, that you have sinned, you have lied and stolen and hurt people and manipulated and been selfish, and you have brought evil into his good creation. And that begins to put a little knot in the bottom of your stomach, like, uh-oh, maybe I've messed up. Maybe I've crossed the creator of everything, the most powerful force in existence ever. And that puts a little bit of fear in your gut. I'm not appealing to your fear. That fear is natural because it's a truth. The very truth is that God holds your entire being in his hand, and you have spit in his face, metaphorically.
Well,
That is
since
Go ahead.
Since you did metaphor, I'm going to do an analogy. Let me put it in another. Before I put you in the place of God to think about how you would act in that situation. Now let's do what government normally wants us to do, but we're going to do it for edification this time instead of control. We're going to put government in the place of God for a moment, but not just any government, an actual real U.S. Government based on the U.S. Constitution. We don't have one of those right now, but if we did, hear me out. So we have the Bill of Rights, and those enumerated rights are very important to us. They existed before. We wanted the government to know about them and protect them. So in that way, we like the government because it protects our ability to worship freely, to speak freely, to think how we want, to have a free press, to be secure in our papers and effects. These are all very good things. And so if from God's perspective, going back to God gives us protection in a lot of things. We love him because he first loved us. He showed love to us. Now, government can't show love to anybody, but going back to the government side, pushing, he goes, oh, fear of God's bad. Well, let's go to government. Now, we don't seem to have a problem with murderers, thieves, rapists, fearing the government. Matter of fact, we liked the government just a while ago, and we don't have any problem with people fearing it. Matter of fact, they should fear the government because those murderers and rapists, the police will get after them and ruin their, send the consequences of their actions to them, basically. And that protects us. So we like the government. But then when it comes to God, in that same situation, fearing God, that's ridiculous. We should, if God's all loving, we should never fear God. God says to fear him for that very reason, is for your own benefit. So if you was to get mad enough to kill somebody, you wouldn't normally do it. But if something happened that puts you in that position, your fear of paying for those consequences is one of the motivating factors to save that other person's life, no matter how wicked they are. They get a fair trial, right? This is America after all. We're supposed to have fair trials. We used to. Anyway, so the idea that God, the ultimate judge, should not be able to make these same type of judgments that we place in the hands of humans, and that we shouldn't fear him whenever we think it's good to fear a few men. This is very hypocritical, and he's infinitely more just than these guys. He's infinitely more just than our Constitution. Our Constitution is... Yeah, go ahead. I'm done.
No, that's okay. And like you said, we fear the government, but we also like the government. And in the same way, God has given us a much better reason to like him, because we absolutely should fear him. Like I said, we are sinners in the hands of a very just God, and that can be a fearful thing. However,
Well, just like we get angry at people that rape, God is angry with sinners. God, sinners in the hands of an angry God is Jonathan Edwards' old sermon. Very good, by the way. And so, but we're like, oh, God's angry. He's mad. We should fear him. This is leaving out information to appeal to your emotion, and this is your condemnation one that they're harping on. Anyway, so the hypocrisy of saying that rapists should fear the government, but you shouldn't fear God, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Agreed. And so God gave us a very good reason to like him, because what he did was he sent his son. He came down in human form to die and take on the penalty for what we deserve. We deserve absolutely, from where we've already talked about, sinners in the hands of an angry God, we deserve death. And it is the just wages for sin. However, God sent his son himself in human form, bodily, all man, all God, fully man, fully God, in the form of Jesus Christ, to come and live a perfect life, to be given over to the government, tortured and crucified, buried and resurrected to overcome death and allow us a place with God in eternity. And that is more than the government, whom we fear and like, has ever done for us. And we did that because... Go ahead.
Well, unlike God, government can never give what it doesn't first take. God is the giver. He's all good things flow from him. He gave us life. He gave us creation. He can give without taking. And if there is any taking, he takes from himself. So he's infinitely more lovable and likable than any government. And yet it's okay to fear the government. It is definitely okay to fear God. That's why it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and it says is that beginning of knowledge in different places. And so if you, well, I was about to go deeper on that, but that's kind of getting into the weeds. I think we need to stay on our appeal to.
Do you want the next sub?
Yeah, we can talk about fear, godly fear, another time.
Okay. So how about the appeal to flattery?
Oh,
so
I use this one all the time.
In the same way, that making a decision based on fear rather than logic is invalid, and it is a fallacy. Making a decision based on flattery instead of logic is a fallacy. And so probably the one that I see this the most within our arena in apologetics or evangelism is, hey, David, like, you seem like a really smart guy, dude. Like, you got it going on intellectually. You're smart, man. And I know that you're smart enough to realize that there are really smart people like you who believe in Buddhism. And there are really smart people like you who believe in Enlightenment religions. And there are really smart people like you who are witches. And I know that you're smart enough to realize that as long as you're searching for something, as long as you're looking for an answer, you'll realize that all answers lead to the same place. All religions lead to God. And you're smart enough to realize that, right?
Oh yeah, dude. If they're at least as smart as me, then we can all work together. I'm sure they got to be. Not see that. Number one, I was trying to bring in the joke about lying just a little bit, but yeah, I'll find another place to stick that in. But that disarms people. And so there's actually, Bible talks about people that flatter. In Proverbs talking about the words of a friend cut deep or sting, but lies or lying lips puff up or something. That's wrong. But it's something that's the general idea, is that friends will tell you the truth and other people will puff you up or appeal to flattery to get what they want out of you.
Agreed. I was looking it up for you, but so anyway, I didn't find it in time. Yes, and I don't know that we need to go off on a really long conversation about flattery because it's very close to fear. It's just the opposite emotion. On the first one, somebody has torn you down and made you feel vulnerable. And the only way to not feel vulnerable anymore is to agree with their argument. And in this way, somebody has built you up and put you on a pedestal and made you feel good about yourself. And the only way to maintain that view of your heightened status is to agree with their argument, or else you'll get knocked off your pedestal. And so in both ways, in fear or flattery, we don't make decisions based on that emotion. These are both subsets of the appeal to emotion. We make decisions based on facts and truth.
Also, if you've been listening to our previous ones, the appeal to flattery, when you're listening to someone, means you're putting yourself under them. You're already sort of inoculated against that one, and it will be super apparent when someone tries to use it.
Absolutely. The next one is not quite as apparent because often it's built into a story. A lot of these are actually, if you realize it, stories are emotional, and we're a people who like stories. Humans like stories. And they bring out the emotions in us. The next subset is almost always couched in a story because it necessitates it, and it's the appeal to pity. So someone is asking you to pity other people. Let's take that same one in flattery and instead turn that into an appeal to pity. So David, like, you know our friend, we'll call him Fred. He's a Buddhist, man, and you like Fred, don't you? I mean, he's a good guy. Remember when he helped you move a couple years ago? And what you're telling me is that Christianity says that Fred is going to burn in hell for eternity because he's such a good guy. Notice I'm completely throwing facts and knowledge and the argument out the window, and because the argument is not that something just happened. We lost David. That's okay. Hopefully you still got me. The argument is not that the differences in the religions, because that's what we should actually be arguing in those belief systems. If you're saying all belief systems go to heaven, or everybody who believes in any belief system goes to heaven, you're arguing that all the belief systems are just as valid. However, there are distinguishing disagreements within those belief systems, and those are the facts that we should be focused on. We should be focused on, okay, well, if we're saying that Buddhism and Christianity both lead to the same place, what are the facts? What does Buddhism believe? What does Christianity believe? Well, first off, Buddhism doesn't believe in a God at all, and Christianity believes in the God of the Bible. Those are mutually exclusive facts, and we have to look at that and say, can they both be true at the same time? Can all roads lead to God? Can all roads lead to heaven with these mutually exclusive facts? But the way we've couched the argument, we've gotten rid of those facts, and we've begun to appeal to emotion. And we've said, but this person that we know, you're just saying they're going to burn in hell for all eternity because of what they believe, and that's an appeal to emotion, because we're trying to make the argument that that's going to happen because of that emotion, rather than the differences to where the argument actually becomes mutually exclusive and logically invalid. We pass up that logically invalid argument because we were riding on emotion. What do you think, David, since you weren't here for that whole thing?
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully we'll get internet here soon. When I get a phone call, it completely knocks me off. So, but I didn't mean to distract from what you were saying.
That's okay. I basically what I showed was in the argument of a Buddhist and a Christian, the facts that we should be looking at is if we're trying to say all religions are the same, all religions point to the same place or end in the same place, or all people go to heaven, whatever it is, you have to look at the facts of the religions and do they make mutually exclusive claims? Like Buddhism does not believe in God at all, and Christianity believes in the God of the Bible. Those are mutually exclusive.
And
That's
if
the
one
logic.
of those exist, then you are violating the excluded middle.
Exactly. And so that's the logic you should be looking at. But the way we couch the argument about, hey, you think Fred's going to go to hell because he's a Buddhist and what a nice guy he is, and you just want him to burn in hell. That's where we get into the appeal to emotion. I was trying to really flesh out that difference between looking at what we should be looking at, the logic and the facts, rather than the way the argument is couched in emotion and what leads us into fallacy.
Well, that argument it's actually a common argument used to, if you was to talk to Fred about Christ and try and witness to him, then they would say, "Oh, well, you're not respecting his worldview, and you're wanting to change his worldview, and this and that, and you're such an evil person." But then if you don't talk to him and you just think that he's going to go to hell, then then they're attacking your worldview, and they're telling you that, oh well, your way of thinking is so wrong because Fred's going to burn in hell if he doesn't believe just like what you do, which is not true. There's only one thing that saves you from hell, and it's not thinking the way David does on everything.
Praise God, right?
Praise God. So
so that's the appeal to pity. Do you want to move on to the next appeal?
I see a common thread in all these of deceit by omission for these appeals to emotion.
Yeah, they usually appeals to emotion have omitted the facts and included a story that brings emotion into the argument or the discussion.
All right, let's keep on trucking.
So the next one is the appeal to ridicule. I love this one. Like, David, you believe in evolution, don't you? I mean, every thinking person who's been to grade school believes in evolution. Like, seriously, you believe in it, don't you?
Be ready to take some pity or appeal to pity, because I don't.
Yeah, exactly. And the appeal to ridicule is basically ridiculing you, or it's either ridiculing you into believing an argument not based on fact, or it's ridiculing an argument to the point where it seems not valid, even though it's only ridiculing it. It's not actually addressing the factual arguments or factual premises of the argument. Go ahead.
Well, especially with the example that you just gave, I think that, and this may be true a lot of times, that the appeal, what was it? Appeal to ridicule? What was it?
Yep.
Is that what it's called?
Yep.
Appeal to ridicule transforms or evolves into an appeal to authority, but it's an authority of the group. That I think that's probably pretty common for, and they're pretty closely linked for ridicule to evolve into appeal to an authority that everybody's, I guess it's kind of a peer pressure thing, but it doesn't have to be, because it can be not your peers. Every thinking person or every person of this expertise believes this, so it's dumb, and you're dumb for not believing them because they have more knowledge than you do.
Right. And that's the appeal to authority, which it can be closely tied to the appeal to ridicule. And with most internet atheists, it is very closely tied to the appeal of ridicule. Because if you don't believe what your textbooks say, then you are absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go. Okay. So we'll keep moving on.
Baiting me here. I see it. You're sitting there baiting me as if they're looking at
kind
what
of baiting you, seeing how far you're going to go. But we'll keep moving on. And we have just a few more that are subsets of the appeal to emotion. By the way, we kind of mentioned appeal to authority a minute ago. That will be on another show. That is a logical fallacy, an appeal to authority. This particular example was the appeal to authority with the appeal to ridicule, because they're ridiculing you for not believing in the authorities. The appeal to authority does not always include ridicule, but can, and that's how we used it in this example. The next one is the appeal to spite. And the easiest way to do that is, or to give an example of that, is whatever you believe. Doesn't matter. Let's say you like coffee, and I can prove that Hitler liked coffee. Now you're like Hitler. And it's ridiculous to like coffee because Hitler liked coffee, and you spite Hitler. So why would it be logical to do anything that he does? I mean, Hitler liked to breathe too. And if you like to breathe, you're a Nazi, man.
Oh man, I wish I knew the name for the appeal. That's another. Well, that's a new internet one discovered since the time of the internet is the appeal to Nazis.
Yeah, the logical fallacy called the appeal to Nazi, or the appeal to Hitler is probably what it should be called, because that's where everybody goes with it. So the idea of this logical fallacy is that they either set up an argument where you are spiteful because of what you believe, or, and the major one, the real one, is they create a bias against an argument because of innate spite that you have. And so they're saying you have a spite towards this people group or this action or this thing, and I've linked that thing now to your argument, so you should not believe your argument. Or I've linked the opposite of that to my argument, and so now you should believe my argument. Basically, we're trying to sway your thinking by your own spite. You have a spite for something or some people, and we're linking them to that to sway your decision-making process, not due to reason. And if you've noticed, that has been a consistency through every single one of these fallacies. They're not based on reason. That's why they're called appeals to emotions.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, actually. I was sitting here nodding my head thinking that exact same thing, and then you said it. What we're speaking of are the deceitful and therefore malicious usage of these appeals. And that's why they're called appeal, because it rests on that deceit or that omission to manipulate you. There are reasons, if you didn't know, that if someone, if using the spite one, for example, and I'm probably not going to be able to think of an example, but now that I've mentioned it, but what were the ones we covered so far? We've covered fear, spite.
We have covered
pity.
Fear, flattery, pity, ridicule, spite. And they're all couched under emotion. So appeal to emotion subdivided into fear, flattery, pity, ridicule, and spite.
Okay, never mind. There are some of those that are invalid all the time, like flattery.
Yep. So the next three, so we've covered those so far, and those are all called appeal to. So appeal to emotion, and the sub ones are appeal to fear, the appeal to flattery, the appeal to pity, the appeal to ridicule, and the appeal to spite. The next three actually aren't called appeal tos, but they are still appeals to emotions. And the next one is called judgmental language. Um, so, for example, we in modern times have certain uh, stereotypes, and the judgmental language often can include a stereotype. And so, if I were to say that, David, you believe in natural remedies, right? Like you prefer to seek natural remedies before you seek um, pharmaceutical remedy. Would that be a valid statement about you, that you prefer to seek natural remedies over pharmaceutical remedies?
Yes,
If you
and
if you
this,
can.
I prefer to make the smallest change to have the effect that I want uh, for any given effect. So increase the amount of dose or change or effect or power of the change until I get the effect that I want. So I'm not going to immediately get a 10-pound sledge to drive in a finishing nail.
So that question that I gave you was couched in what could be pretty unambiguous, unjudgmental terms. Now let me restate the question. David, you believe in wives' tales and home remedies and like conspiracy theory, naturalism over modern medicine, right? Over science and the way that we understand things. Now, do you get the judgmental language in there and how that it appealed to your emotion because I tied it to conspiracy theories and crazy things?
And
Um,
also anti-knowledge or anti-science.
exactly. And so, and by the way, we're both this way. I would much prefer a natural remedy over a pharmaceutical remedy if one will work. I'm not saying throw out all pharmaceuticals. I think that God has given us some amazing knowledge and that we have discovered.
Where did they come from anyway?
Right, exactly.
White willow to aspirin,
Mm-hmm.
Penicillin. So
Right. So we're not trying to appeal to emotion the opposite way by setting up straw man arguments and all of these. We're just trying to show the example of how that judgmental language changed the emotion within that discussion because there was judgmental language in it. And I would like to just give a shout out to one other example of judgmental language, if you don't mind. There is a word that David and I both like, and you will probably hear much, much more about in the future because we will probably be starting another YouTube channel about it. The word is called dilettante. Dilettante. And the dilettante, when you look up the word back in 16th century Italy, it meant basically a Renaissance man, a man who loved science and art. That actually, if I went, I've got a Webster's dictionary from, what is it, 1838, right?
28.
1828 Webster's dictionary right over there. And if I were to go look in that dictionary and I looked up the word dilettante, it would say a lover of art and science. What a great definition. Guys, people who just loved art and science, these were people who were maybe mathematicians and artists and bird watchers and whatever, painters. And so these
No, Jason, that's impossible. You cannot both be an artist and a scientist. That's impossible. You should never combine those two, ever.
Okay. Just go ahead and make me feel bad about myself. Language of ridicule or appeal to ridicule. So anyway, right around the 18th century, governments began to want to control certain parts of society, including knowledge. And so we created the university system, and we began to say, if you want to be considered a master in a certain field, you need to go to our college, get our education, and we will license you as a master in that knowledge. And dilettantes, these Renaissance men, these people, lovers of arts and science, they often did not need money or need to do any of their passions as a job. And so they didn't want to go to college to get a degree for something that they didn't need. And so they said, nope, we're not going to get your degree. But the government wanted governments in general, and this is how governments are, wanted a stronghold on knowledge. And so they began to create a propaganda campaign with judgmental language against the word dilettante. And they began to say, look, these guys are just amateurs that are uncommitted to these fields. If they were committed, they would go to college and get our degree, right? If they want to be masters in a field, they should go to college and get the degree. But these guys are unwilling to do that. They're unwilling to get our degree, which means they're uncommitted, they're amateurish, they won't devote themselves to the craft, and so they are just flaky. And when you look up the word dilettante today, not in that 1828 dictionary, but in the modern day, just Google it, it will say things like uncommitted amateur. And so the word itself was actually tainted by judgmental language. Oh, thank you, David. That's fantastic. A person having a superficial interest in art or a branch of knowledge, a dabbler. That is the definition now of dilettante. And that definition was crushed because of the fallacy of judgmental language. The governments began to create one who delights in promoting science or the fine arts, dilettante. There you go. So we can see that the definition of this word has been tainted by this logical fallacy called judgmental language. What you got to say about that, David? And thank you for that. That was phenomenal with the special slides and stuff. That was neat.
Yeah, just figured I'd try that out, and it worked pretty good. Yeah, actually, I'm using both. The first one was from Merriam-Webster.com, and the second one was from the Webster's 1828, which is in the public domain nowadays. So there's many different websites that allow you to search that particular book. And so you could, but this is both from Webster's. You can see the difference. Even the secondary definition here, I don't need to spend too much time on this, but this is probably kind of important here to show. Even their old definition that they have for number 2, the dated version, an admirer or lover of the arts. Now, that is completely different. The wording creates a different image in your mind than. So what they're saying is that the old definition, this is what the old definition was. That is not the old definition. Old definition is one who delights in promoting science, or the fine arts. So they left out science, and they gave this idea of you're just an admirer from afar. You don't have any expertise in it. You don't work in it.
You got no skin in the game.
Right.
Yeah, so you can see how judgmental language destroyed a word in the English language. And it's such an invalid argument because the real question in that discussion should be, can someone master a field of art or science? Can they delight in a field of art or science without becoming a licensed, getting a degree in it or becoming a licensed professional in it or doing the government's form? Does society have the right to tell us how much we delight in science and art? I mean, and does society limit us from gathering data and having a masterful knowledge of a field outside of public education or traditional educational systems, especially now that we have the internet? Like, neither one of these arguments makes sense when you isolate and clarify and get rid of the emotional language of it. And so David and I actually consider ourselves dilettantes. We don't care what the modern definition says, and at some point we will probably be starting the channel The Dilettante and talking about those things as well. just wanted to bring up that kind of side argument because I felt that it went well with the judgmental language fallacy.
It's a perfect example, and really, it feels good to say it out in the open after talking about it for so many years.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad it kind of worked into this. We've talked about dilettantism for so long. Both of us are pretty passionate about art and science. We delight in it, you could say. So let's move on. I think we're pushing our normal time. So we got two more. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
The fallacy of poo-poo. Did you know that there was a poo-poo fallacy? That is a subset. No, it's a subset of the appeal to emotions. And basically, this is the fallacy that poo-poo's an argument just straight out the gate. Like that argument is not even valid of being worthy of consideration. So I'm trying to think of an example, but I'm going to go with a crazy one because I probably have used this. I have probably poo-pooed the idea that the Earth is flat, the flat earthers and those arguments, and in most of my time I just poo-poo it as a little ridiculous. But the truth is that flat earthers are making some claims, and we should logically isolate and clarify their claims, and then look for truth with data and logic and reason. I shouldn't just poo-poo it right out the gate because most people that I know that believe in it are conspiracy theorists. You're not allowed to.
That word in and of itself was created specifically for the judgmental language fallacy
and an appeal to ridicule.
Ridicule, yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So that's an appeal to ridicule and judgmental language right there. And I've been guilty of that, to be honest, because that argument, I've had people come to me and they want to know my opinion on that, and they want to have debates. And the reason I've poo-pooed it is because, honestly, I didn't want to take the time to look into their arguments. I didn't want to. Sometimes it takes some research and dedication and time to prepare for a debate or a discussion, and I haven't wanted to do that, and so I've poo-pooed it as a not valid argument. But that's illogical, and I'm admitting that it's illogical to just poo-poo the argument. Now, one day I'll be ready to address those, and the preliminary research I've done seems to have defeated the argument out the gate, but I'm admitting that I have partaken in a logical fallacy when I just poo-poo the argument out the gate. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and a lot of times, and this is a very, very good example because it puts us in the place of the people that were. So normally it's the atheists, right?
Right. I'm giving them a break for a few minutes.
Giving them a break for a little bit. And it's nice for us to be able to put ourselves in that situation, an example where we might do it, so that we can respond to someone that's doing that to us. I'm looking at the microphone instead of the camera. Sorry, you're over here. We can respond to them the way we would want someone to respond to us on that, even whenever it seems like, they're just being, well, like you said, not taking the time to even think about the issue. So that being said, when someone does get trapped up in something that is poo-pooable by other people, well, in particular, Christians in apologetics, that like the flat Earth people, they're genuine.
Yeah.
And if you care about them, then they do need a response. And so what's happened to those people is that they have been manipulated with deceit by omission. So they're leaving out information. Great example. I'm going to brainwash the world on camera right here. But don't worry, I'm going to unbrainwash you immediately afterwards. You'll be just fine. No damage will happen. No permanent damage will happen. And I cannot take credit for this technique. I learned it from Ken Hovind, who I admire greatly. And but it gives a perfect example of the type of omission that can create such a passionate defense of a seemingly indefensible position by well-meaning people. So I'm going to give you some information, and then I'm going to ask you to make a deduction based on that information. And that information I give you is all the information you need to make the proper deduction. But I'm going to leave a little bit of information out so that I purposely cause your deduction to be right where I want it to be.
Okay.
So imagine this scenario. A man leaves home jogging. He makes his first left turn. He continues jogging. He makes his first left turn. He continues jogging. He makes his first left turn. Toward his home. Toward home. I just gave it away. There are two masked men at home waiting for him. Who are they? You have all the information now that I've given away, especially to know exactly who those two men are.
I don't know.
They're the catcher and the ump.
That's a great example.
So you were brainwashed into thinking there was a man exercising and that there was thieves at home waiting for him. Now, we could have given that man stand your ground and had those guys executed. And then you would have been perfectly okay with it, potentially, depending on your view on that. But it would have been justifiable under most laws in the United States if those two men would have been killed by the guy running home. But under the laws of baseball, that would have been a foul. So the point here is that it that's how easy it was for you to kill two guys unjustifiably. And these guys, these flat earthers, they've been given truth. I told you the truth. The guy left home. He made 3 left turns heading back home. That was all truth. There's and verifiable truth on top of that. But then I either left out important information or injected a little bit of lie. Either way, it's a deceit. And now you're in a completely different area where you're willing to kill two guys that shouldn't be killed.
Yep. And that's how most belief systems are. I don't, out of all the belief systems and religions that I've studied, there are very few that are so illogical that they are just insane. Most of them are filled with truth and a little bit of lie, or filled with truth and just not all the truth, with a little bit of omission, right? And so that's how most arguments, because think about this, most people I know are somewhat rational and logical, and very few people are just gonna be like, well, that makes no sense, I'm gonna go believe that, and I'm gonna stake my whole life on that, whatever that argument might be. That most people aren't going to do that. That's why most religions, most belief systems that disagree with Christianity, which I think is considerably dangerous, they're filled with truth, and that's why people believe them, because they're filled with truth, with either a little lie or either a little omission. So let's jump on to the last fallacy that we're going to do for today. And I'm going to couch this fallacy in a belief that I have. So it would be wishful thinking if I tried to get you to believe the way that I believe by using this argument. I am an anarchist. I think I'm. Yes, we're just going to go with that. I'm an anarchist. I am not your teenage draw on my hand, let everything go to hell anarchist. I just don't believe that men should govern men. I've never met a man who is infallible. I've never met a group of men who are infallible. And I think that if there is someone who is infallible, then that person should rule rather than infallible people. And I believe that there is an infallible man, Jesus, and I believe that he should rule. And that men should not have to govern men. Now, that being anarchy, if I were trying to convince you of anarchy, I would be like, dude, so wouldn't it be amazing, just phenomenal, if we didn't have to be told what to do? If every man just innately knew good, and we wouldn't have to make laws, we would just have to allow every person to obey the laws because man is good. And so we should all be anarchists. This is the fallacy of wishful thinking. Wouldn't it be great? Well, yes, it would be phenomenal, but it's not going to happen. You see, I'm an anarchist, but I'm also a realist. So I appreciate the American government. Please hear that I said that. I appreciate governments in general, government of man. I appreciate that we keep striving for, and we should continue to strive for, the best man-made government that we can, while we're in a position that men are going to have to govern men.
You don't, it's stated more simply, or not more simply, I don't mean to say it wasn't simple. Stated another way, that it uses words and terminology from our previous episodes. You can't love your neighbor if you allow a government to oppress him. So it's your duty, if you love your neighbor, to have the best possible government that can be attained. In the United States, in some places, there's authoritarians and dictators and protecting your neighbor on a day-to-day basis involves a lot more than what it does here. And so anytime someone wants to make it to where you can't love your neighbor, then that person is trying to create trying to corrupt your government or create a bad government. You should always be able to influence your government. And when you can't, of course, that's, taxation and everything else without representation. But the point is, you don't want your duty to love your neighbor or rather your civic duty is wrapped up in your duty to love your neighbor. Let's put it that way. I just said I was going to state it more simply, and that's what happens whenever you try to one up somebody. Is you just you go down. But let's say it that way: that your civic duty is wrapped up in your duty to love your neighbor.
Absolutely. And so, if I were to try to convince anyone to be an anarchist on that argument, I would be. It's not an appeal. I would be participating in wishful thinking, which is an appeal to emotion. I'd be trying to get your emotions to make you make a decision or believe in something because of the wishful thinking, not because of the facts that I presented. And so that's the last logical fallacy. Another good example of wishful thinking argumentation might be the Oort cloud, but I don't think we're going to go back over and argue that again this week. But that's wishful thinking, we need wouldn't it be cool if we had an invisible asteroid comet generator right outside the solar system that will perpetually, provide us with the comets and asteroids we need? That's wishful thinking. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great? When you hear "wouldn't it be great" in an argument, it should raise a red flag. You're participating in wishful thinking.
Yeah, but I suspect that the wishful thinking ones don't give themselves away so readily. I actually
agreed. Most often, go ahead.
Go.
I was going to say most often wishful thinking, honestly, when I look back at actual real world application, most often wishful thinking comes in the form of skewed statistics, and things like that, either skewed statistics or projections that people would act a certain way, and we'll take away all in our projections or our statistics, we'll take away all the negative consequences or ideals or probabilities and just present the wishful thinking through statistics or predictions. That's probably how I've experienced wishful thinking fallacy the most in the real world.
This is an interesting one. I'm looking it up here to get some more examples just for myself here.
Well, while David's looking for another example of wishful thinking, I would like to cover one thing real quick, sidebar, that we like to cover every week. COVID-19 has made it difficult for local congregations to gather together. And we're not telling you to go against the advice there. However, it is important for every Christian to be involved in a local congregation. We are the body of Christ. The buildings are not the church. We are the church. And it's important for every single one of us to be part of a local body. So please, if you're watching this and you are not part of a local congregation, go find a local Bible-believing congregation in your community and become a part of the body of Christ, because God will use you as his hands and feet, and the local congregation will be the primary vehicle which he uses to empower you and employ you in the body of Christ. That idea of joining a local church and the gospel, which you heard about 15 minutes ago, are the two things that we would always like you to hear in an Apologeeks show. So that should be everything. David, have you come up with any new examples?
Yeah, but not necessarily. One of the examples is the fake spiritualist, the medium communicating with the other side, basically allowing his proofs, which are not proofs, to sway you toward his statement or his premise, his argument is being propped up by proofs that give just enough feeling of proof to something that you already want to believe. Yeah. So because he's telling you that he's talking to your grandma. So basically they create a situation where you want to believe it, but you're rational, so you don't quite believe it yet. And they give you proofs that aren't proofs at all to nudge you over that line. And so that was but another interesting thing was how these appeals to emotion kind of interlink and work together. So I read where it said reverse wishful thinking, which essentially is appeal to fear, where they increase the threat level to a point where proofs that it's a threat don't need to be logical or consistent to cause you to believe what they want you to believe. So put in that way, I now understand the wishful thinking better.
Yeah, and you'll often find that rarely do people use one of these subsets. Most of the time, if people are appealing to fear, if they're using the fallacy of appealing to, emotion, they're going to probably end up appealing to more than one emotion. They'll be using more than one subset. And David made a great point, and here's something I want to point out, which may seem fuzzy at this point, but we're kind of doing this on purpose. At some point in the future, we will be having an entire Preston Stirred about syllogisms. And that's the kind of formal way of creating a logical argument. You would have premises that if this premise and this premise, then a conclusion. So you have your premises and your conclusion. That's a syllogism. The most famous one being A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. And if both of your premises are true, A equals B and B equals C, then therefore it's a logical conclusion. It has to be correct that A equals C. That's how you get a syllogism. Often when you see these fallacies that we're going through right now, what you'll find is that they're usually within the premises, one or the other premise, and that's where we're going to look for logical fallacies. But I would like us to be aware of critical thinking, logical fallacies, proper thinking, before we get to that kind of formal way of putting together an argument. That way, when we do get there, it'll be like premise one. Oh, no, dude, that's a logical fallacy. It's the appeal to emotion. And more specifically, it's the appeal to fear. Or that's a logical fallacy. It's the poo-poo, argument. And so you're poo-pooing an argument in that premise, which makes your conclusion not quite as sure, because there's this logical fallacy in your premise. So I know that I jumped ahead, and that's confusing because we haven't talked about that a lot. I just wanted to give you kind of a glimpse of where we're going in the future and why we're using this route. So we're giving fallacies. Next week, we're going to be talking about more fallacies. We don't know which one yet, but this will probably be a several-week series because there are so many ways to think badly. Let's just be honest. That's what fallacies are. They're bad thinking. And these bad thinking, as you saw today, how many of the appeals to emotions are used in advertising, in people trying to sell to you, in the manipulation of people making you make an illogical decision with your money? You'll find that these fallacies are all over the place, and that's why we want to be aware of them. It's why we want to have a great understanding of them, and it's why in the future we will be very clear on calling those out and have a lot of practice of isolating, clarifying, and then being able to identify the fallacy within a premise or an argument. You got anything else for today, David?
No, well said. I was just, as you was talking, my mind started running on all the stuff that we had talked about and what could be next week, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I think I might let you pick the logical fallacies for next week.
Even more exciting.
Yeah, because then I'll come cold. Maybe you guys don't know this, but David and I, to do this channel, the way that these Preston Sturge shows came out of phone calls that we've been doing for 15 years. Just iron sharpening iron, two guys trying to find truth together. The phone calls tend to last about twice as long as these shows do. Actually, the phone calls were lasting about 3 hours, and we decided one day, why not let the world in on our phone calls and sharpening each other. And so we've been through this type of stuff a lot. But one of the things that we really, really wanted with this channel was to be very organic with you guys. And so you'll see that sometimes we struggle for the right thing to say, or we struggle for an example maybe. And that's because as much as possible, these shows are unscripted. And we went so far as to one of us pick the topic, and usually I let David know, or he lets me know by about Monday what the topic is going to be for Saturday. And then we don't talk about it again at all. We don't study the same resources. We just know the topic so that when we come into this call or this show, it's cold, and that we're coming from different directions. And often, hopefully, you see the joy in the fact that we're different and that we come from things at a different angle. And that's part of what makes this organic and fun, not only for us, but hopefully for you. And so today I was the one who picked it. All I gave David Monday was that we're talking about appeals to emotions. That's all I said. And that there are subsets of those. So David came in very, very cold. I at least had the list of appeals to emotions to look at throughout the week. David didn't. He may have found it. He may already know it. But I don't know if he knows that or not. I don't know if he's ever broken them down that specifically before. And so that makes for a very cold call when he's coming into the show. So that's why I was thinking I might let you pick the fallacies that we talk about next week, so that I'm the one coming in more cold, and you have a little better grasp on what we're going to be talking about.
Well, that's the way our conversations work anyway. We normally are learning from each other, and so a lot of times when you pick something, I may look up some things, but it's only to further my own thoughts on the subject that I've been thinking to myself before the call. So
Right.
it's not something that I run out and get the list like I didn't know about, or I don't ever remember learning about wishful thinking. Now, I have read a lot about logical fallacies, and I've studied them over the years and whatnot. But whenever we learn something from each other, in these calls. Matter of fact, we're actually making a big sacrifice for the audience in a way that I wasn't expecting to, in that we are kind of prohibited from making any calls to each other like that while this show is ongoing.
And
we
by
didn't
the way,
really,
we felt that. That is
yes,
true. We're not appealing to your emotions and want you to feel pity for us, but we have felt that actually, I kind of miss our 3-hour calls sometimes. But as we gain support for this channel, as we actually set up support mechanisms and things like that, hopefully we'll be able to branch out and have more, and eventually you guys and the channel will be that avenue through which you can participate in and watch us develop in the way that we have done organically and naturally in the past.
yes, and the way that another reason to be organic in this way, where we're sharing our phone call with a third person that we don't necessarily know, which changes the verbiage a little bit, but we tried to think of it as, we're in the backyard with, at a gathering of one of our friends, but the other person necessarily doesn't share the same friends, and we're staying in a circle around several people we don't know, but we're still having a conversation. That's the way we kind of try to imagine it, to include our audience to share. But the one thing that we didn't, when we tried to use that in our mind to create the conversation here, one thing that I personally did not think about missing so much was, even though I don't know the person, they would speak back.
Yeah.
And so we're not getting that feedback directly right
Not
now.
yet. Yeah, not yet.
Well, it's not, yeah, and it's not just because of the viewers necessarily, but even we don't have a lot of mechanisms set up for that. But we have been thinking about it. In particular, a lot of our people that we know that would watch stuff don't watch stuff that's an hour and a half or 3 hours, or even an hour long. And so from the beginning, we've thought about breaking this up into smaller nuggets, so to speak, because for years we've known that occasionally we'll hit on a nugget in our call and we're like, man, I wish that was recorded or something.
Right.
But up until just now, at least for me, I was thinking about going through this on our own, and we could potentially miss something or clip it in the wrong spot. So in the future, we're talking about the support circles and the kind of counselors and stuff, kind of different ways of communicating with us that we'll set up and get input from you guys. One of the things I think we should do now is to have other people pick out these nuggets, because we may miss them on something that we covered that we didn't think was very important, but other people may think it's important. And so having folks pick out what other, like when we clip it out, we're going to clip it out for a whole other video. And it will be just that for that video for other people to watch that don't necessarily watch this whole thing. So be thinking about what we did that was worth sharing again, and let us know. And we're going to create channels that you can do that better. But I think that's definitely going to that would get the most minds on this as possible to achieve our goal of getting the right information to everybody.
I completely agree. And right now, that primary channel is live chat or comments in the sections below for any video. And guys, one of the benefits of being this small right now and just starting out is that you've got two pastors who are dedicated to answering every single comment. Like, we don't get a lot right now, so you can get some FaceTime with us and some back and forth. So we ask you, help us out. Let us know, one, what haven't we covered that you want us to cover? Understand, we're kind of methodical guys, so you'll notice we expand a lot on small issues, and it's going to take us a long time to cover a lot. If there's things you think that we need to cover now, put them down below. I love the idea of people's eyes on the videos and helping us pull out those nuggets, which we're going to call filtered. Filtered are going to be the smaller videos that maybe you heard us say something in this hour and a half video now or something like that, that one of your family members could digest in a 5-minute video. And did we cover that in 5 minutes? And can I pull that out and turn that into a smaller, more compact, filtered video that you could share with your friends and family? If you saw that, let us know, because that's what we're working on, creating those smaller filtered videos. So we would love your help on that. We appreciate it still amazes me that most of the people that watch this don't know us and are not subscribers and are not the people that we send the link out to. You know, I know a few of our friends and family are long form content people and watch this, but most of them are not. And so most of you guys, we don't know yet, and we'd love to meet you. Introduce yourself below. We will be responding to every single comment, unless it's, baiting and derogatory or spam, and please don't waste our time on that. But if you're anything other than that and you want to talk to us,
all the spammers that had that, they've been sitting here waiting for the end of the
they
video.
were going to. That was right.
You're excluding them.
They were just going to manipulate me with appeal to fear anyway, or appeal to.
Yeah, actually, I was just using appeal to wishful thinking on myself as you was talking, because you were talking about a 5-minute video, and I was like, but maybe even a 1 or 2 minute. I'm like, no, there's nothing we say that's just that long.
Actually, so that you guys know, and I haven't told David this, so you can see his original reaction. My intention is for there to be 3 levels of teaching on this channel. The first level being this geeked out, pressed and stirred, just long form babbling, and we should have ended 40 minutes ago and we're still talking type level of interaction. Then there's the filter, the idea that we have gone off on maybe a little monologue. I think one of the greatest examples is if you go back and you watch episode 1, my intention in episode 1 was to give the simple gospel, and I was ready to rock and roll. And before that ever happened, David was like, maybe we should just listen to people, and went off on this little monologue about listening to people. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. I had no intention of that, and yet it was great information. Fantastic. And that will probably be our first filtered show, is just me cutting out that monologue, giving a little intro and outro to the video, and just presenting that. So there's a rough off-the-cuff monologue from David, which would be a filtered episode. And then later, I plan on going back and taking that information and creating a thought-out, scripted, as professional as I can, short video, like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 minutes long, that covers that in the most poignant and condensed way possible, while having the highest production value. That would really be the videos that you guys can share. You want a 2-minute video on the appeal to fear. Well, maybe we had some great monologues, and we can have a filtered, 7-minute, 5-minute, 7 minutes of us talking about the appeal to fear. And then later, who knows, maybe it can be animated or something like that. That's a very high production value, where we've taken all that information and scripted it down to its most basic, poignant, and potent parts.
Dude, I love this. I love that idea, because what that essentially does is that we take a 1 or now 2 hour show and use that. Of course, we always knew that was going to be what we generated this other stuff off of. But we always thought of, well, only certain people are going to watch this, only certain people are going to watch this, only certain people are going to watch this. Now with that in mind, you got the high production value one where someone can get it just real quick, but necessarily you're going to leave some stuff out, and you're also going to miss the entire making of, which when you watch these high production value YouTube channels, a lot of times you miss just how many takes or what, the stumbling or the thought process in a lot of these, a lot of their videos or their information. And so you could literally get one of the high production value ones, and not only do you get more information if you watch the other ones, but you actually get to see, in some instances, and this has already happened more times than I can just off the top of my head think of, where we actually discovered or thought of something, isolate and clarify. Great example. We have a missing mnemonic already still that we got to figure out. And so we're discovering things as we go along, which was what we did in our calls and what we wanted to share with. But now that we're doing it, we're seeing it, and we're talking about our plans, and then we realize, hey, people could even tell us which ones we should cut out. It's just, now I'm even more excited. This is great.
Well, man, I've had a lot of fun this morning. And so I'm in my office at the church, and the janitor is getting closer. And he's tried to stay away from my office for as long as possible, and he's getting closer and closer to my office. I can hear it. And so I think I'm hitting the end of what I can do on this. I've had a lot of fun, guys. Seriously, comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you are an apologeek. If you know geeks about apologetics and evangelism, please share, subscribe, hit the bell, all that fancy and fun stuff. David, you got anything else?
Nope. Pray us out, please.
All right. Father God, we thank you for this opportunity to talk to people and to just discover truth, to go through this process together, hold each other accountable, and we ask that people begin to get involved. If they feel that this is their cup of tea, if this has helped them, Lord, we ask that you give them the courage to speak up, to contact us, to become part of the community. Lord, if there were things that we said that were selfish or thoughtless or not of you, we ask that you just take those out of this conversation altogether, and that you, in the end, be glorified. Lord, we repent for our sins. As a group, we repent for our sins individually. We praise you that you sent Jesus to pay for those sins. And we ask that hearts be moved and changed, and bring us all back next Saturday so that we can continue this exciting journey, Lord, in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
See you next week.